So you've heard perhaps of IQ before. Intelligence quotient is what that stands for. IQ is, a number. And then after that came EQ, or emotional intelligence, also a number, that people have high emotional intelligence. And so this theory here on the screen proposes cultural intelligence, a comprehensive understanding of how people have a conception of culture. And it has these four features that you see on the screen. The cognitive, of course, is what you know, what you understand and know about another culture. But the metacognitive is really your reflection about what you know. And that, in this sense, I think what it means is you recognize the limits of your knowledge, the first field. You recognize that there are limitations to how much you know about this other culture, and you recognize the gaps. That's what metacognitive would be. Motivational is strangely named. If you read the research, what it actually refers to is what you believe about other cultures. And the belief systems is a very tricky thing to be able to change. How can you change what somebody believes about another culture? And then behavioral, of course, is how you behave regarding another culture. Okay, so I am going to distribute a handout here that does not have enough for everybody. So I'm going to ask that it be shared with two people. Each handout be shared with two people. And as it's going around, I'm going to give you an explanation of what's on this handout. So across the top, it says something about the, that's not right. Where did the handout go? The handout slide is not there. It says something about the Global Citizens Project and the Global Citizens Competencies. Hold on, before this gets too far, I gave my only handout copy away. I'm going to need one myself. Where's the stack? Stack. I need one of these back. Oh, they're over there too. Sorry about that. I'm getting close to the camera. So this is one university's idea of how to make their students into global citizens. And this is the framework that they used. And the way we're going to understand it is the middle column of black boxes where it says global competencies. And what they want are the students to be able to do those three things: have awareness, take responsibility, and then participate. They feel that if they do all three of those things, they've become global citizens. And the way that those are transferred into more academic ideas is the boxes just to the right of that, where it says knowledge is part of global awareness, right? When they understand things about the world and other cultures, they've gained awareness. So gaining knowledge. The second line down, global responsibility, corresponds with analysis. So what this worksheet is giving us is some ideas for how we can take what seems like a subject that is hard to change, what people believe about other societies, what they're able to do about different cultures, and turn it into something that is more of an academic exercise. Because we have analysis right there next to global responsibility. The students can analyze. And then you start to see how you might use this in classes. So the top level is knowledge, what they learn about other cultures, and then comes being able to analyze those other cultures. And then the third row down, global participation, where they're able to synthesize not just the knowledge and the analysis, but also actions to take, addressing complex issues. So these are meant to give you an idea for how you could take this vague notion of global thinking and turn it into an activity in class where you have them learn about a culture and then have them analyze the cultures and then finally make suggestions for solution. See how that works? So it's really just an example for you. There's no work to be performed with this particular handout. We're going to go a little further in the culture idea and talk about communication issues. Now, many decades ago, the way to talk about cultures was to rank them and compare them to each other across certain axes, and these are what was used. So something like the second one, individualism versus collectivism, was a spectrum, and you would say a country falls somewhere in the middle, or it's very collectivistic, or it's very individualistic. The example I always use for that one is the United States is very individualistic, and then a country like Japan is very collectivistic. It's about the whole society thriving, not one individual. People are sometimes actually very selfless in a collectivistic society. And then countries can fall in the middle of that, of course. So this is a very famous way of thinking about cultures and countries, but it's also a very old way of thinking about cultures and countries, and people no longer really want to, it's almost stereotyping, really. People don't really want to make those large assumptions about an entire culture, so instead we talk about interactions between cultures. You've heard of culture shock before, right? What is culture shock? What's an example of that?
Something you can't expect that in your system.
In your system you don't expect?
Right, when you experience a totally different society or culture from yours without having prior information about it.
Right, so, right, so there's a newness to what you're encountering, and it is not your society. The classic example is study abroad, right? You become a student in another country, and then you get there and you realize, oh, they all do this, and you didn't expect that, like you said, right? That's culture shock. Culture bump, what's on the screen behind us, is a little bit less of a shock. It's not so shocking to discover something that's a difference. It's a little bit more like a surprise. You might even be amused by it a little bit, like, oh, that's interesting. So a classic example would be a Japanese soccer player who comes and joins an American soccer team and plays and has a bad day and gets mad at everybody. And that's not the surprising part. The surprising part is the next day he comes back and has to shake hands with each player and give an apology individually to every single player. An American would never do that. At most you would hear like, sorry everybody, so the Americans are surprised when they see the Japanese player shaking hands individually with everybody, because that's important to his culture, to his particular honor system. And that's a moment of culture bump where the Americans say, wait a minute, that's a little bit different. And so what we need to think about are, we don't like to use culture shock necessarily to compare cultures, to think about cultures next to each other. But culture bump, minor cultural differences, can be a way that we talk about cultures. So when we're educating our students to become future employable employees, right, with the right skills, and they think globally, we're going to have to give them pieces of information about other cultures, make them discover other cultures while they're students here. And that's going to lead to culture bumps, moments where they have to encounter it. And culture bumps, people have different reactions to. Some people are interested right away, and they want to learn more, and that's a good reaction. That's what we want people to do when they recognize a culture bump. But some people are a little bit more uncertain. They don't immediately think that might be a good thing. So a culture bump can happen not only when it's one country and another country. What about like, within the same country, an older generation and a younger generation? What about Saudi women learning to drive? Right? There's an example of a culture bump. Let's try this here. I'm going to ask this side of the room, the ladies, the students that you have, your female students, what do they think about women being able to drive? Excited? Happy, I thought I heard? Yeah? Okay. What do the male students think about women being able to drive?
We haven't discussed.
It hasn't been discussed. Some of you are shaking your head, so I don't know what that means. Yesterday I heard an answer that I thought was a pretty honest answer, which was the students are uncertain. The students are uncertain what to make of this. They recognize that it's change, and they recognize that it might be good change, but they don't immediately say like, that's great, because it's themselves that has to change, right? So that is a moment of really what we're talking about with culture change, and you being the one who has to change your culture is we're asking for a moment of maturity, really, right? A recognition that I can grow beyond what I already believe right now. That's the skill that we're trying to develop in our students. In this particular example we're talking about, it's within your own society, but we want them to have essentially the same reaction when they meet other societies, right? So forget that example I just gave right now, but if you land a job working for a company in Riyadh, and the company, almost all companies have global partners, right? They're people you have to interact with through the internet and through networking and web cameras and those sorts of things. They will come across culture bumps. And what we want is for them to have the appropriate level of personal maturity that they recognize difference but want to embrace it. In fact, maybe even we want them to seek it out, right? That might be the ultimate embodiment. I need to advance a slide here just so I don't get lost. The ultimate embodiment of students seeking diverse viewpoints. A true global citizen doesn't just recognize that there are differences. A global citizen is actually interested to find out what more can I learn? What's another culture I don't know anything about? And how is it different from mine, and what can I learn from it? So the trick then is, how do you turn that into an assignment? What can you do in your class that would have them engage questions like this? So we're going to do a different kind of activity here. You're going to do 30 seconds of silence, and I'm going to time you. You're not allowed to talk. Don't do any writing. Don't look at your phones. Don't do any of that. 30 seconds. In 30 seconds, I'm going to ask you, what could you do in your class to make our students a little bit more global citizens? Time starts now. Hey, no talking. Just kidding. Okay, let's first find out, does 30 seconds feel like a long time or a short time when it's very silent? It can sometimes feel like a long time. But you should have the courage to try it. It's actually quite useful for students to focus their minds and just think about nothing else. Who's got an example? What can you possibly do in your class?
Well, I'm teaching engineering economics as an engineering student, for this generic class for all the third year students here. And here I'm trying to explain to them in the class that the concept of interest, compound interest and all, which really doesn't work within this nation because for various reasons. But I try to explain them that when you have to link globally, when you have to do business globally, you have to accept this in mind. The significance of interest, the parameter of interest in economics and in financial activity.
Mm-hmm. So do you have an exercise where the students do something with that?
Yes, yes. And I try to do it with something to do with the New York Stock Exchange. I try to explain them with the variation of the oil prices and all these things, how the value of the currency, how the value of the economy changes accordingly.
According to interest, yes. Good, that's a good example, yes.
Just a very nice coincidence. We just did something like this. It's just a real case study. I have an MSc student, and we developed a collaborative research project with one of the best universities in the world in UK. And during this summertime, she was on a summer placement over there. She is a KFU MSc student, and she spent 1 month in UK, in one of the best universities there. And she had a research there with the supervisor, who is from Italy, and the research group has students from UK and Europe. So it was a good experience for her.
So did you get to debrief her experience with the rest of the class?
We are going to do it because we
good.
just started our next semester now.
Right, it can be very powerful for students to hear from a voice other than your own, right? You might be able to tell them about something that happens in another culture, and that's sort of interesting for them. It's a lot more interesting when they can hear it from a fellow student. For some reason, that just plays better. Any other examples of what you might try? Yeah.
Well, our students usually like to travel.
Mm-hmm.
And one type of activity I sometimes do in my classes, depending on the course I teach, is to have them work on a project describing the places countries they have visited in such a way that the other students are exposed to a new place, a new culture, and they can inquire and learn from it.
Good. Also leveraging the power of the student voices to the other students. I like it. Yeah. Okay, and last one.
Well, in science, especially, the life science and physics, we encounter a lot of scientists or creative minds that have come from different parts of the world.
Mm-hmm.
So actually, in each class or course, I introduce these scientists to my students so that they know and where this scientist is from, so that they know that regardless where you are, from where you are, you have to contribute to the development of the humanity as a whole, not just part of the world or, small place.
Yeah, it can bring a science or any discipline alive a little bit if you do the history of that subject, where they learn a little bit about the people involved, and especially if there are cultures that contribute to that, right? So I don't know of an immediate example in biology. In physics, though, Einstein did many of his discoveries in the United States because he was fleeing Nazi Germany. So that's a way of bringing it alive and also having a conversation about culture as well at the same time.
It's kind of motivation for the students.
It is motivation for the students. Okay, I didn't actually create the next slide. So we're going to try something very different from your usual experience here. On the screen is the Japanese character for the word haiku. Who knows what a haiku is? It's a type of, I think you might, it's a type of poetry. It's a poem. And a haiku is only 3 lines long. The first line is 5 syllables, syllable. You all know what a syllable is, right? 5 of those in the first line. The second line is 7 syllables, and then comes 5 syllables. So I'll write this down on this thing here in a second, 5, 7, 5. And I'm going to ask you to write a poem here in just a moment. The poem does not need to rhyme. In fact, it's better if it doesn't rhyme in a haiku. No rhyming. Just 5 syllables, 7 syllables, and then 5 syllables. And I'm going to give you an example of one. So what you're going to be asked to do is write a poem about a student who values diverse viewpoints, right? What does the student look like who cares about diverse viewpoints? Okay, so my first line is, understand people, different viewpoints are valid. Seek them out, in fact. Okay? So it always sounds a little bit mystical when you have a haiku because it's not full sentences. It's just little fragments of a sentence. But I would like you to try this yourself. And on paper, write 5 syllables and then 7 syllables and then 5 syllables. A student who values diverse viewpoints. Go ahead and do that, and then when you're ready, show it to the people nearby. Okay, now we're getting ready to switch out of the global thinking idea, and I wanted to spend a minute or two talking about what you should do about it. As you think about making your students into global citizens, here are a couple of best practices, multiple curricular elements. In other words, don't just give them readings that are related to this topic, but you should also maybe have homework that they have to work on or something that they do in class so that it's reinforced. And this is just good teaching practice in general, right? When you say something to them, that's one thing, and they might get it, and they might understand it, but it works better when you say it, and then they have to practice it somehow. Right? They go home and do homework on it, or we use class time to then practice it in some fashion. And then in both of those, the readings or lectures and then the practice, the word in red is the one I want to highlight. They should challenge the students. Right? Whatever it is you give them to read, whatever you give them to practice, should be something that makes them think. Maybe even say, aha, or they're challenged and they feel they must extend their horizons to understand that completely. You don't want culture shock, you want culture bump. Okay, I am going to give you, I think it's about 8 of these green slides throughout the presentation. This is the first one. These can be thought of as little conclusions, and those 8 conclusions together is really the big takeaways. I call them takeaways from the talk. So one of the things I hope is obvious from the first part of what we did, why study skills, or soft skills, not study skills, why soft skills are important. The takeaway should be that you feel this is your job. You do have to teach these things. And you're going to hear me say that again in a couple of different ways, because some of these are topics that we don't normally teach in all of our classes. Right? If you have a class about global relations, of course you're doing global citizens. But if you have a class on microbiology, you might not be doing global citizens, but you should. Right? It's still our job to do it. And you have to own it, quote unquote. Because as the first bullet beneath it says, if you don't own that, then nobody else will. I think the reason the employers in my country and in yours feel that the students are not ready is that too many of us think it's somebody else's job to teach this stuff. And if all of us think that, well then that's the situation we find ourselves in right now. The students are not getting those things. So I'm going to try to convince you these things are your job to do. That's big item number 1. Okay, it's not quite break time, but I have just a couple of minutes to maybe do the first slide of the next bit. We're going to switch to talking about teamwork and leadership first, and then we're going to talk about English language competencies. So I'm bleeding a little bit into the next section because we need to. This is another idea you'll hear me repeat a couple of different times, but I give it to you at the beginning here because it's useful to remember why we're going through these. It's because there are no accidents in learning. If you leave it to an accident, it's probably not going to happen. So we're about to talk about teamwork. So let me give you a very concrete example of this. If you give an assignment to your students, and the assignment is design a hovercraft, and you say you're going to have to work in teams, and then that's it. That's the only idea you give them, and then you assume that now it's taken care of. I'm teaching teamwork because I gave them a team assignment. You're leaving it to an accident right now, right? Being intentional will actually mean a different thing about this hovercraft assignment. You have to actually teach them what teamwork looks like, it turns out. Okay, and the quick activity I want to do before we get to our break is why we should teach teamwork. And this is another moment for you to talk right away with the people next to you. Why should we bother teaching teamwork to our students? What value is it? Good, go. So as we left, we were talking about the slide teamwork here, and I had been asking you to think about why we should do it. But before we even get back that far, I want to try to do something a little bit different, and that is maybe model something that some of you do in your own teaching. So you see students, do you see students every day, or is it like Monday, Wednesday pattern? The Monday, Wednesday pattern? Right, okay. So sometimes some time has gone by between when you last saw students. Have you ever tried a method where you help them remember where we left off by getting them to think about what did we talk about last time? Right, so I'm going to do a little of that right now. Just asking you to come up with keywords or a key phrase or something. What are some of the things we talked about in that first 75 minutes while we were here today? Any order, doesn't have to be in the right order.
Cultural integration.
Cultural integration, that's good. Global thinking, very much the phrase we used. Soft skills, right? That's the overall enterprise we're engaged in, the idea of soft skills. Very good. Diversity and diversity of viewpoints. Excellent. What, say again? Teamwork, right. So we had just barely touched it, but you're right. That's teamwork is where we left off. And so As a reminder, what I had said there was that I want you to think about why we should do teamwork, and I gave you a couple of minutes there. So I'm not sure if you took notes or now you've just refreshed your memory. Let's see if this works. I know 15 minutes have gone by, but what did you say? What were the reasons we would do and teach teamwork to our students? For cooperation, meaning that if we don't bother with this, then they will not cooperate as well, as easily. That's good.
Students tend to learn from each other more.
Students learn from each other more. I think that's true as well, right? We talked about that a little bit in the first 75 minutes, that they always listen to their peers.
Sharing of knowledge.
Sharing of knowledge. So that actually means something different. A third thing to me that it's important to remember that sometimes 3 people will come up with much more information than just one person.
Yeah.
Right? 3 heads are better than 1, or 4, or whatever your number is. Any other thoughts why we should choose? Oh, in the back.
We can ask them to read the scientific articles, read together and tell the concept or the hypothesis.
Okay, so you're asking them to, as a group, to summarize and to synthesize it together. Yes, that's very good. So that's more than just knowing knowledge, like we heard about over here. That's doing a different skill, but also doing it as a team. I like that. I thought I heard...
Respect and tolerate differences in opinions.
So this is related to that first topic of diverse viewpoints, right? Respect and tolerate differences of opinion. And in fact, even being able to manage conflict, an idea that's going to come up again a little bit later in the talk today. Yes, in the corner?
To teach them to enhance their performance by teaching them that how one task can be solved easily by dividing among each other than if they will do at
Okay, so leveraging the power of a team. So you talking, I think you were talking about taking the whole task and putting it into parts and sharing the parts. So that's a way a team is much more powerful than just one person. You can get more done. You're more efficient. You're more productive. And time management, yes. Although that can be very challenging with a team. One of the next things we're going to talk about is the challenges, and time is one of the problems there.
To improve their social skills so that they can discuss and relieve their shyness.
Yes, so shyness can be a problem. They need to have the right social skills. When we get to the professionalism topic, you're going to see that their ability to have interpersonal relations is critical to their success. And teamwork is part of that, right? So these topics we're talking about, teamwork and professionalism, they really overlap in a lot of ways. So one more.
To prepare them for their future work environments, they will have to work with other people, so they need to be.
That's maybe the most important one. Let me say it again for the microphone, that they have to work as a team often when they get a job. This is going to be their work experience. So the place to learn that, the place to make mistakes even, is in college, not once they're on the job later on. So I think that's an absolutely critical observation, that we want the students recognizing, even though they might not like working in groups now, that this is their future. They're going to have to work in groups. Yeah?
So in a nutshell, it is to foster a win-win scenario in all aspects.
To foster a what scenario?
Win-win scenario.
Win-win scenario, yes. It is, I think so. Although even, I get what you're saying and I agree with it, because even the things that look like challenges, once they're overcome, is exactly the point of what we're trying to teach, right? It's still a win-win scenario. Even though there's a little pain to go through sometimes.
No pain, no gain.
No pain, no gain. Are you from America? This is one of our sayings.
With ethics.
And ethics, is that what you said? Yeah, that's right. Teamwork and ethics have a pretty big overlap, actually, that they, I think maybe we'll talk about that when we get to the very next slide of problems. So last one, then I have to move on. Develop communication skills. Another example of these overlapping categories, right? We talked about communication and teamwork as though they are separate things, but teamwork is a way of practicing the communication skills. Okay. It's good that we took that break at that moment, because this one is another moment where you're going to jump right back into group work. This time I want a list. I want a list of bullet points, as long as you can make it, of all the things that can go wrong when you assign group work in your class, and it's a group grade. everyone will share the same grade. So all your students are, that's a group of 4, 6, whatever it is, they all get the same grade for the project. So come up with all the problems that can happen when you assign that group project. Okay, let's hear some of your answers. I have some of my own, and I'll mention them if they don't get mentioned. I hear that you're already being volunteered, that you have all of the answers. So I'll make you spit out your coffee. Well, let's hear her answers. Let's hear one of them at the start.
Okay, one of them would be like, one of the problems would be the one student that always dominating.
Okay, dominating students. So any of you have that in your list, that the one student might dominate? Well, not just elected team leader, someone who just wants to talk and dominates the conversation. That is a problem and dominates the work. Okay, good. What's a different one?
Dependency on others.
Dependency on others is almost, you can imagine a group where there are 5 people who are dependent on the one person who is dominant, and all 6 people are happy, but it's not actually a team. Right? So you're not getting any of the benefits and the things you're supposed to get out of team. Yes?
There will be at least one person in the group who will be least interested in what's going on in the group, who will not least contribute.
So yeah, very similar to those who were not wanting to take the lead. And you know, at the end of that extreme, that spectrum for us, in the United States we call them freeloaders, right? They're just along for the ride. They don't want to do any work. They're happy with the group grade, whatever it is. But that makes other people unhappy. So there's a fairness problem that comes out.
When we start having these freeloaders or the tourists in the group,
Tourists, yeah.
the sense of deprivation, it is a discouraging as well, because at the end, it's a natural selection. We are going to a very competitive market outside. If everyone ends up having the same grades, so it's a sense of deprivation within the group.
Yeah, well, of course.
Who's doing a lot of jobs for the other people.
But we may also be modeling for them behavior that they will see in the business world. You can have and imagine a business team where somebody manages to get a job but is actually lazy and then is put on the team and then doesn't want to do any work on the team. So this is still a problem even after graduation. And so I think that the students need to be aware of that. I think that needs to be an explicit topic of conversation with the students to make it less of a problem so that they recognize this is not just something we're doing unfair to keep down the teacher workload. I've had students say that before. You don't want to grade all the projects, so you make them group projects. This is not fair. But that's not why we're doing it, and so you have to explain it to them. Yes?
They are having conflicts.
So conflicts within the group, so people fighting within the group, disagreeing about the direction to go or the work to be performed. Different kinds of conflict needs resolution. You had your hand up first.
Yeah, she just said conflict, but I will add also jealousy.
Jealousy as well, yes. Particularly if what was the jealousy example I was going to give? It had to do with one person doing more of the work, right? So if I'm the person doing all the work, I feel negative to the people who are not doing all the work. In the back of the
Recognition.
and proper recognition. That's right.
Somehow related to them is like personality issues.
Personality and personality types. Is that what you said?
Sometimes you don't want to work with somebody.
Oh, I see. That there might be people who don't like group work in general.
Yeah. I mean, even within the class, I mean, you have like hello, hi, but you really don't want to work.
That's right. Now, sometimes people have, that's just their preference in general. And if you ask students, many of them would say they prefer individual grades rather than group grades, right? Because of issues of fairness and other things. So what's your answer to that if they say, I prefer individual grades?
They must engage to the teamwork because eventually they will have to face it in the workplace.
That's exactly right. They're going to come across this in the workplace. So, you know, you cannot go to the boss after the group has done, the team has done a project and the boss is unhappy. You cannot go to the boss and say, well, I did my part, you know, blame that person, don't blame me. This isn't going to work, right? That it is, in effect, a group grade when you're working in an environment and it's a team project. There are no individual grades. It is a group grade. So you just have to get used to it. I think I cut off another hand. Yes?
One of the things that can happen is maybe problems with time management,
Time management, actually I have, my very second bullet is about the difficulty in scheduling meetings, right? If they're supposed to work on this thing, often they have different schedules and it's difficult for them to find the time to meet in the first place. This is a problem inherent in group work. Maybe one more, last one.
Weak team players may affect the quality of the whole work.
Weak team players bring down the quality of the whole work. Certainly they can bring down the atmosphere of the team as well. But especially if you're dividing the work, then yes, the quality has become lowered. So we have this phrase in English that the weakest link, right, is often the, I said last one, but okay, you can have one more.
Yeah, I just need to say this example related to these problems. Sometimes when you put people together in a team, especially students, it happened to me maybe last year. I put 3 students, they were living in a different places. They had totally different schedule with each other. They were just attending my single class at a common time. So they didn't even have any time together to spend for the project, and by mistake or somehow they were put into one group. And believe me, when the semester was about to end, they came at that time that we never had any meeting. And although they were submitting the milestones of the project, but they were not of that quality. And I was really worrying why they were doing that. And then one of them, I'm the only one doing and nobody else is doing, and this is how.
So you had all the problems in one group.
So that's why I wanted to share this example.
Yeah, there isn't a perfect solution to this either, right? I mean, I suppose it is a bit of a problem that you didn't know until later in the semester that they were not able to meet. That might have been something we could do something about as teachers. But the fact when they feel like they're doing different levels of work, that's common. And really the only solution we see sometimes is people combining individual and group grades, right? So a variation of this would be, as you turn in the group project, you also give a grade to every one of your partners. And then as the teacher, you can sort of see a pattern emerge sometimes where if everyone grades one person low, that person might have been the freeloader, right?